Okay, so moving forward, we're going to talk about squaring, grafting square roots and cube root functions. So a couple of vocab words that are important to point out. A radical function contains a radical with a variable in its radicand. The square root function y equals square root of x is an example of a radical function. So a couple quick things about vocab. Your inside number, your inside value of your square root is what you call your radicand. I know we've talked about this before, but I just want to make sure we highlight it again. Your square root is called your radical symbol. And the whole thing, square root, the radical symbol in your radicand is called your radical function. This is with your y equals, the whole thing is considered your radical function. So let's look a little bit more closely at the graphs of square roots and cube roots. We'll zoom in just a little bit here. So the graphs of your square root function, y equals square root of x, where a is greater than 0, actually, and this gives you your a on the outside. So the graphs of your square root function, y equals square root of x, where a is greater than 0, and your cube root function, y equals cube root of x, where a is greater than 0, are shown below. So in these two cases, I gave you guys the parent function. Your a is actually the values out in front of your radical symbol, and they're given to you guys here below in your two graphs. Your square root function, if you can remember, your square root function is the inverse of your parabola, your x squared function. So remember, back to lesson 4, if you took your square root function and you took its inverse, which is of course your square root function, if we flip this, you got something that looked like this graph off to the right. But remember, that does not pass your vertical line test. So your square root function, we're going to erase this bottom part, is only the top part arrow of your square root function. So that it's the top part only, not the bottom part. So your square root function, if you look at it, your domain is going to be x is greater than 0. Your range, when x is greater than or equal to 0, is y is greater than or equal to 0. When your value out in front, a, is greater than 0. Your cube root function, very similar to that. If you take your cube root function and it looks something like this, if you take its inverse just like we did in lesson 4 and flip it, you're going to get the inverse function, which is your cube root function. But because that passes your vertical line test, your domain and range are going to be all real numbers.